Hello, this is Christina Barr, and you're watching Black Tea News. Hello. Welcome to Black Tea News. I'm your host, Christina Barr, and today we're going to be talking about this. I posted this stuff over the weekend, but I wanted to talk about it today. There was a story up covering Canada and them euthanizing people, and I've heard people talk about it, how they were expanding it, but AP did a wild story about how people are choosing to die rather than pay their medical bills, and the hospital issuing that out there a recommendation or kind of coercing people who are desperate into those situations. It kind of seems like and it's really interesting because though the US doesn't have a perfect healthcare system, far from it, so many people are like, Canada's the best because they have free healthcare, yet they're in this certain position and situation. So I want to talk about that story. Also, there's a story about a school district out in California, and in Oakland, California, that they've been really battling about how they're going to teach kids how to read. And so they have the way that works, like the phonics based kind of reading that I suppose I learn how to read and other people learn how to read, can read pretty well, versus like some other sort of woke stuff that they tried to do. And it left people not knowing how to read. So people were battling with it. And there were people, it just seems so crazy to me, especially the commentary that's in the beginning of the article. If you didn't read it yourself when I posted it, it's pretty remarkable. But I'm not totally surprised, because when I started really digging into things like critical race theory, there were people who were really who consider that sort of neutral, balanced sort of approaches to academics we're just whiteness, like a form of whiteness, not joking, and that they needed to deconstruct that kind of stuff, that system, and reconstruct in a way that was not white. And they really go to like experienced based learning instead, and that kind of stuff just doesn't work. So we'll be talking about that. Also, the FBI, we know the warrant has been out now, and that became pretty much public, I think, after I got off the air on Friday. And Trump is upset because he says that the FBI took some documents that were like attorney-client privilege stuff. And it's amazing that they were acting like it was a narrow search, and there were leaks. Like, oh, they were looking for classified information. He could have had the nuclear codes, all that other kind of stuff, which codes would have been useless if he had them. They just switch them over and they turn them on. They changed them quite a bit. But they wanted like everything that they could get from the day he was basically in office. So it just seems like a fishing expedition, and the narrative surrounding it is kind of changing from, oh, they were doing this because of this is hair on fire situation. How could we have let the president be in Florida and have nuke codes, to, well, maybe we don't know if this was actually all legit, but maybe it's a good thing. It kind of seems like that's where the narrative is shifting. In the end, they just really don't want this man to be president. And I don't understand the need to continuously keep attacking him other than to punish him, because they're still mad that he won in 2016, that he dared to win. Because if they just left him alone or leave him alone, there's a possibility, though he's like a clear front runner for running, there's other people warming up to other candidates, DeSantis for one. So if they just stopped doing these things, and if their goal is for Trump to not be president, they could get that wish. But I think it's always bigger than him. Though he's big enough to have kind of made his own enemies and caused his own problems, I think there's always a lot more to the story. And it's not just about crushing Trump, it's about crushing everyone around him and making an example of him out of next time, because they like their political opponents to be squishes. As I think maybe I started saying that because Michael Knowles started saying that, but I know I say squish a lot to describe these kind of like feckless, weak Republicans types. So before we jump into everything, I want to encourage you guys to go to blacktnews.com, check out different content that I have on the website, different articles that I've written about the raid, etc. There'll be more stuff that'll be coming out. Have a lot of topics on race and abortion and critical race theory and all that other kind of stuff. Please go on the website. Make sure you guys are putting in your emails, joining the email list. You guys are checking out different merchandise we have, like the cool goat hoodies. We also have them in different t-shirts and different colors as well. The Denounce White Supremacy Defeat Joe Biden t-shirt with a list of his racist stuff on the back. Also got Be Better Not Better, all kinds of goodies. I'm still plugging away at my book, and I will let you guys know when that is all finished and ready for like pre-order and all that kind of good stuff. Writing a book on abortion, and I'm not going to tell you guys the title yet, but it's a good title and you guys will really enjoy it. Also, if you like what I do here at blacktnews.com, please consider leaving a donation at blacktnews.com/donate. Whether it's me streaming or running my website, getting from place A to B, traveling, doing specialized videos, like there's cost to all kinds of different stuff the equipment that I use, the programs that I use, any sort of templates or anything that makes good quality content and stuff. That all is associated with a cost. If you would like to donate, I appreciate you. You can go to the website blacktnews.com/donate. Any give, $10, $25, $50. Very much appreciated. If you can't do that, I thank you guys for sharing, for liking, for subscribing, for commenting. All that stuff does help boost the algorithm and all that good stuff. So make sure you're following across Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and you're following. Like Facebook used to do likes and now they do following. So make sure that you're doing both. Never know when they might switch it up again. I want to also thank Brighter Michigan PAC. I'm in their studio today. If I say something today that triggers you, nobody cares. Nobody cares. They just like to uplift conservative voices, and I appreciate being here in the studio. So you guys know that I like to start with something funny. And so over the weekend, we had some kind of big water pipe in the facility, like local water plant or something, that busted. And so it affected like a lot of cities in the Michigan southeast area. And so my mom called me on Saturday and let me know about it because I didn't get any kind of alert. I don't think I did. And so she called me and let me know. And my mom is funny. She always believes in having a bunch of water bottles. And she says you need a pack of water, a case of water for at least every person in the house. So like when she goes to the grocery store, Walmart or Myers or something, there's always like get cases of water. I went over there Saturday to take her to Walmart to go get more water. But she's like, this is why I always tell you, you need you need a case per person. So but anyway, she called me and she told me about it. She was trying to get a hold of my sister who's at work. And my sister was just like, well, maybe she forgot I was at work. So she was just kind of ignoring her calls. And then eventually she answered. And my mom told her about the water advisory. And then she's like, oh, I just drank some coffee. She's like, don't drink the coffee. And so I guess terror kind of struck in her. So my sister said this to group chat. She said, when your mother blows up your phone at work and tells you not to drink the coffee when you just finished a second cup. So that was actually like a video from the Jurassic Park. And so her jello was shaking. It was just so funny. I just had to share those memories. It was really funny. Actually, I don't know if I'm still been acting as if the water advisory is going on, but I got my own extra case of water and stuff. It's not very convenient, but these things happen and you just need a better, I guess, infrastructure, I suppose. Also, I want to play this video from Kamala Harris, the genius, who was talking about equality and equity.
So when we talk about equality, well, that's a good goal, but let us not presume that because everyone should be treated equal, that they start out on equal footing. So equity as a concept says, recognize that everyone has the same capacity, but in order for them to have equal opportunity to reach that capacity, we must pay attention to this issue of equity if we are to expect and allow people to compete on equal footing.
Did you just say that in order to have equity, we need to pay attention to the issue of equity? That was, I think that was a blur. The RNC had equity as a concept says recognize that everyone has the same capacity, but in order for them to have equal opportunity to reach that capacity, well, we must pay attention to the issue of equity. Okay. Kind of give me the what is a woman? A woman is whoever identifies as a woman, right? This kind of vibes. Not great with the definitions there. But there's a lot of just stupid stuff in there. First of all, equality should be the goal, because we should have equal protection under the law. All men are created equal, natural rights, all that good stuff. Like equality shouldn't be the goal. It should be the thing that we are enforcing in our world. Like she's the vice president, she sits right under the president, and they're in the executive branch. Like equality should not be the goal. It should be the thing. It should be the whole thing. It should be the whole thing. It shouldn't be the goal. That's a nice concept out there and start. No, that's the thing that you are supposed to try to strive that we all get, right? But I agree with her though that not everyone is always on equal footing but as far as what, like we're born into different families that have the more privilege of wealth, others have more privilege of love, and which I think is better than money, but because I've known people who had far more money than my family, but their homes were jacked up. So we all have different sort of metrics of what we see as valuable, as what is important, as what constitute as a privilege, and we just aren't all the same. True, everyone can accept that. Everyone's not coming up from the same. So, like if you're like born as an heiress in New York, it's not the same as being born in Appalachia or something, right? Not the same. We can agree with that, but she can still like apply equality as far as policies and and law and all the other kind of stuff. Funny thing about that though is Democrat Party platform actually rejects the idea that we need like neutrality. They reject that. I think I maybe still have. Let's see if I still have the snippet in here. I might have got rid of it about the Democrat Party platform. Oh, here we are. Democrats are committed to standing up to racism and bigotry in our laws, in our culture, in our politics, and in our society, and recognize that race neutral policies are not sufficient to rectify race based disparities. That's interesting. So, this is from 2020, by the way. So they are saying we to stand up to racism, we have to make racism. we have to have racist laws. We have to favor one race over the other, etc. We can't. She's like, equality should be the goal, because it can't. But it's not really the thing that she believes in. It's not the thing that her party is pushing. Is that it's not their goal actually. She just says that because it sounds terrible if you don't think equality is the goal, right? Like I said, it should be the whole thing, but it's not. They don't believe in neutral based anything. Even in 2020, like the idea of like affirmative action and other stuff could be better in practice back in the day or something, and now people could see, this is hurting Asians, and other folks. And they're like, well, it doesn't matter because my kid's not Asian and they're black. It's like, well, that sounds racist, but that's what their party pushes. And so she's like, that's why we need equity. But the craziest thing is she said we're all born with the same capacity. Who believes that? Who believes that? That we're all born with the same capacity? Are we all born with the same intelligence? Are we all born with the same kind of natural like work ethic? Like you can train people to have work ethic, but some people are just like naturally workhorses and other stuff like the we're not all born with the same capacity as far as what we can physically do. We all don't possess the same kind of emotional sort of capacity. We're not, and different environmental things and how you're raised and taught can play into these different things, but the same capacity, that's just not true. Like if you're a gymnast, for example, you have a different physicality than someone who's going to be a swimmer or a if you're very tall, there's a chance that you could maybe be a swimmer, but maybe someone who's going to play volleyball for the Olympics one day. But they prefer, if you're going to be a gymnast, to be very, very petite, very, very small. And as a matter of fact, as you do those athletics, the kind of stuff that you're doing, it kind of like stunts your body. But no, we don't all have the same capacity. That's just dumb. And so as she continues going on trying to explain, she just says that but in order for them to have equal opportunity to reach that capacity, well, we just have to pay attention to the issue of equity. I if we had if we all had the same capacity, I don't think Kamala Harris would have slept her way to the top. Well, not to the top, like to Biden or something like that, but she like slept her way around to get an edge in California. Like she was a mistress. I won't say the other word that popped into my head, you know? She was a side piece. you so if she thought that she had the same capacity as women who don't need to do those sort of things, do you think she would have did the sort of things that she did? I don't think so. Are you slut shaming her? Slut should be ashamed, I think. Anyway, let's move on. I have a very strong opinion. I already told you that I don't care if I offend you today. As a matter of fact, no one cares. All right, let's move on to this story since we're on the subject of equity and such. This Time magazine article talking about inside the massive effort to change the way kids are taught to read. And some of you probably like, there's an effort to change the way kids read. I guess it just kind of depends where you're learning out of. Like, I learned pretty phonics based, and I'm pretty sure, like, my nephew, he's a pretty good reader, 7-year-old, very proud of him. We're teaching my niece, trying to get her ready for school. But there's other people who are not learning the phonics based sort of way. So the article goes, as a teacher in Oakland, California, Kareem Weaver helps struggling 4th and 5th grade kids learn to read by using very structured phonics based reading curriculum called Open Court. It worked for the students, but not so much for the teachers. For 7 years in a row, Oakland was the fastest gaining urban district in California for reading, recalls Weaver, and we hated it. The teachers felt like curriculum robots and pushed back. This seems dehumanizing. This is colonizing. This is the man telling us what to do, says Weaver, describing their responses to the approach. So we fought tooth and nail as teacher group to throw that out. It was replaced in 2015 by a curriculum that emphasized rich literary experiences. Those who wanted to fight for social justice, they figured that this was new progressive way of teaching reading was the way, he says. Now, you're probably like, that sounds kind of crazy. What do you mean, like emotional kind of stuff? And the experiences and whatnot. Why not the structured way if that's the way that it was working? So there's this pretty fabulous video about CRT from Ryan Chapman. He posted it in 2001. It's got almost 500,000 views on it. But he went through like, what is critical race theory? Where is it rooted from, and examples of their teachings and real world sort of solutions with it, or So one thing that he talked about was academics and how they deconstruct something and they look at, I don't know, They try to look at disparities. They try to look at lived experiences. Lived experiences is very important within like the CRT sphere. They uphold it so high, and they would deconstruct something if they see it as white, and then they would reconstruct it in their sort of anti-white social justice lens. So um, they saw things in academia of being like objective and neutral and balanced, that those sorts of things were white. And you're probably like, that's really weird. Yeah, it is. Very strange. Everything that they don't like is white. So when the article talks about um they felt like they were colonizing, and they thought the structure was dehumanizing, probably like, that sounds so strange. But if you look into it, there's like this thread that still kind of connects to the CRT critical theory kind of stuff. So it's not out of the blue. It's not out of the blue. And people were like, I just now heard about this past year. Well, it's been worming its way through academia for a while. Just because you've never heard of it before doesn't mean that it hasn't been impacting your world. Again, thankfully that I learned, well, I graduated some time ago, but for example, my nephew's still learning how to read in a regular way, but that doesn't mean if people aren't aware of this wokeness that it will not eventually get to you and your child as well. So now Weaver is heading up a campaign to target his old school district to reinstate many of the methods that teachers resisted so strongly, specifically systemic and consistent instruction in phonics, aware awareness in Oakland. When you have 19% of Black kids reading that can't be maintained in the society, Weaver says, who received an early and vivid lesson in the value of literacy in 1984 after his cousin got out of prison and told him the other inmates stopped harassing him when they realized he could read their mail to them. Wow. It has been an unmitigated disaster. In January 2021, the local branch of the NAACP filed an administrative petition with the Oakland Unified School District to ask it to include explicit instruction for the phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension in its curriculum. Weaver and his co-petitioners included civil rights, educational, and literary groups want schools to spend more time in the youngest grades teaching the sounds that make up words and the letters that present those sounds. His petition is part of an enormous rethink of reading instruction that is sweeping the U.S. So far this year, 5 states have passed laws that require training for teachers in phonics-based reading techniques, adding to the 13 that passed such laws last year. And in May, New York City Mayor Eric Adams announced that elementary schools in the biggest district in the school would be required to adopt phonics-based reading program. It's so weird that like there's Eric Adams just got elected, and it's like this is an issue that people have been having, that they need to go back to this. But you keep hearing stories about kids not knowing how to read, and now you're connecting the dots. It's like because they weren't teaching kids the effective way, because they were trying to experiment in these different social ways. It kind of reminds me, and I talked on Friday about, I think it was Friday, about Clarence Thomas and his documentary, and he talked about how when he had his son, he didn't want to drop his son in some kind of experiment of socialization. And they have all these different theories, and then you drop a person in there to try to validate your theories, and then you just mess up people's lives. The timing for such a dramatic change feels especially challenging. Elementary school teachers are already having to recalibrate after 2 years of disruption, vicious fighting about public health mandates, and as well as what kids should be taught about race and gender, and a widespread parental freakout about how little their children have learned during the pandemic. Now, the most fundamental skill that society asks them to pass along is also being completely shaken up. But advocates say it cannot wait. In 2019, even before the pandemic upended instruction, only 35% of fourth graders met the standard for reading proficiency set by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, an even lower number than in 2017. Only 21% of low-income students measured by whether they qualify for free school lunch. 18% of Black students and 23% of Hispanic students can be considered on track for reading by fourth grade. These numbers have been low for decades, but the pandemic has given the dismal result extra urgency. There have been choices made where our children were not in the center, says Weaver. We abandoned what worked because we didn't like how it felt to us as adults, when actually the social justice thing to do is to teach them explicitly how to read. Duh. Duh. The right thing to do would have just been to teach them and to put your egos in check, to do the effective thing. Kids are not an experiment for your social justice. It's a pretty fascinating read. Again, I did post the article on my Facebook page if you want to read the rest of it. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but yeah, that's the gist of it, that there's all these people really fighting to get kids back on track with reading. And that has been an issue in Michigan as well, especially like in the Detroit school area. So, and the pandemic really has made things really, really worse for kids. So just teach them the basics, teach them the basics, the things that we know to work. Moving on, I want to talk about this really, really, really disturbing video. But I'm not video, I'm sorry, article that AP put out about Canada and euthanasia. Now, you guys know I'm fiercely pro-life, and that it just have to do with abortion. It has to do with also euthanasia, but most people just really talk about abortion, and I haven't talked that much about it as well. But this article highlights some extraordinary evil going on in Canada. So AP reports disturbing experts troubled by Canada euthanasia laws. Toronto, Alan Nichols had a history of depression and other medical issues, but none were life-threatening. When the 61-year-old Canadian was hospitalized in June 2019 over fears that he might be suicidal, he asked his brother to bust him out as soon as possible. Within a month, Nichols submitted a request to be euthanized, and he was killed despite concerns raised by his family and a nurse practitioner. His application for euthanasia listed only one health condition as the reason for his request to die: hearing loss. Nichols' family reported that the case to the police and health authorities, arguing that he lacked the capacity to understand the process and was not suffering unbearably among the requirements for euthanasia. They say he was not taking needed medication, wasn't using the cochlear implant that helped him hear, and that the hospital staffers improperly helped him request euthanasia. Alan was basically put to death, his brother Gary Nichols said. Disability experts say the story is not unique in Canada, which arguably has the world's most permissive euthanasia rules, allowing people with serious disabilities to choose to be killed in the absence of any other medical issue. Many Canadians support euthanasia, and the advocacy group Dying with Dignity says the procedure is driven by compassion and into suffering and discrimination and desire for personal autonomy. But human rights advocates say the country's regulations lack necessary safeguards, devalue the lives of disabled people, and are prompting doctors and health workers to suggest the procedure to those who might not otherwise consider it. Equally troubling, advocates say, are instances in which people have sought to be killed because they weren't getting adequate government support to live. Canada is set to expand euthanasia access next year, but these advocates say the system warrants further scrutiny now. Euthanasia cannot be a default for Canada's failure to fulfill its human rights obligation, said Marie Claude Landry, the head of Human Rights Commission. Laundry said that she shares the grave concern voiced last year by 3 UN human rights experts who wrote that Canada's euthanasia law appeared to violate the agency's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They said the law had a discriminatory impact on disabled people and was inconsistent with Canada's obligations to uphold international human rights standards. Tim Stanton, director of the Canadian Institute for Inclusion and Citizenship of the University of British Columbia, described Canada's law as probably the biggest existential threat to disabled people since the Nazis' program in Germany in the 1930s. During his recent trip to Canada, Pope Francis blasted what he has labeled the culture of waste that considers elderly and disabled people disposable. We need to learn how to listen to the pain of the poor, most marginalized, Francis said, lamenting the patients who, in place of affection, are administered death. Canada prides itself on being liberal and accepting, said David Jones, director of Anscombe Bioethics Center in Britain. But what's happening with euthanasia suggests may be a darker side. Euthanasia, where doctors use drugs to kill patients, is legal in 7 countries: Belgium, Canada, Colombia, Luxembourg, uh, Netherlands, New Zealand, and Spain, plus several states in Australia. Other jurisdictions, including several U.S. states, permit assisted suicide, in which patients take the lethal drug themselves, typically in a drink prescribed by a doctor. In Canada, the two options are referred to as medical assistance in dying, though more than 99.9% of such deaths are euthanasia. There were more than 10,000 deaths by euthanasia last year, an increase of about a third from the previous year. Canada's road to allowing euthanasia began in 2015 when its highest court declared that outlawing assisted suicide deprived people of their dignity and autonomy. It gave national leaders a year to draft legislation. The resulting 2016 law legalized both euthanasia and assisted suicide for people aged 18 and over, provided they met certain conditions. They had to have a serious. Can you imagine, like, an 18-year-old deciding that they want to be euthanized? And the doctors being like, okay, and the law just being like, well, that's their right. They had to have a serious condition, disease, or disability that was in an advanced, irreversible state of decline and enduring unbearable physical or mental suffering that cannot be relieved under conditions that patient consider acceptable. So it's very broad, it sounds like. Their death also had to be reasonably foreseeable, and the request for euthanasia had to be approved by at least 2 physicians. The law was later amended to allow people who are not terminally ill to choose death, significantly broadening the number of eligible people. Critics say that change removed a key safeguard aimed at protecting people with potentially years or decades of life left. Today, any adult with a serious illness, disease, or disability can seek help in dying. Canadian Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos said in the country's euthanasia law recognizes the right of all persons as well as inherent and equal value of everyone's life. The countries that allow euthanasia have assessed suicide and how they administer and regulate the practices, but Canada has several policies that set it apart from others. For example, unlike Belgium and the Netherlands, where euthanasia has been legal for 2 decades, Canada doesn't have monthly commissions to review potentially troubling cases, although it does publish yearly reports of euthanasia trends. Canada is the only country that allows nurse practitioners, not just doctors, to end patients' lives. Medical authorities in its 2 largest provinces, Ontario and Quebec, explicitly instruct doctors not to indicate on death certificates if people died from euthanasia. That's like alarm bells, crazy. So 2 of your largest provinces, doctors are instructed not to indicate on the death certificates if people died from euthanasia. I think it's pretty relevant. Why wouldn't you put it on a chart? Why wouldn't you indicate that? That's crazy. Why wouldn't you indicate that? Belgium doctors are advised to avoid mentioning euthanasia to patients since it could be misinterpreted as medical advice. The Australian state of Victoria forbids doctors from raising euthanasia with patients. There are no such restrictions in Canada. The Association of Canadian Health Professionals who provide euthanasia tells physicians and nurses to inform patients if they might qualify to be killed as one of their possible clinical care options. Canadian patients are not required to have exhausted all treatment alternatives before seeking euthanasia, as is the case in Belgium and the Netherlands. Still, Duclos said there were adequate safeguards in place, including stringent eligibility criteria, which doesn't seem to be the case, to ensure no disabled person were being encouraged or careers into ending their lives. Government figures show more than 65% of people are being euthanized due to cancer, followed by heart problems, respiratory issues, and neurological conditions. Teresia Dininger, a professional law and disability studies at the Protestant University for Applied Scientists in northwestern Germany, said allowing euthanasia based exclusively on disability was a clear human rights violation. The implication of Canada's law is that life with disability is automatically less worth living, and that in some cases, death is preferable. Alan Nichols lost his hearing after brain surgery at the age of 12 and suffered a stroke in recent years, but he lived mostly on his own. He needed some help from us, but he was not so disabled that he qualified for euthanasia, said Gary Nichols. In one of the assessments filed by a nurse practitioner before Nichols was killed, she noted his history of seizures, frailty, and a failure to thrive. She also wrote that Nichols had hearing and vision loss. Nichols' family were horrified that his death appeared to be approved based partly on Alan's hearing loss and other concerns about how Alan was euthanized. They logged complaints with the British Columbia agency that regulates doctors and Royal Canadian Mounted Police asking for criminal charges. They also wrote to Canada's Minister of Justice. Somebody needs to take responsibility so that it never happens to another family, says Trish Nichols, Gary's wife. I am terrified of my husband or another relative being put in the hospital and somehow getting these euthanasia forms in their hands. The hospital says Alan Nichols made a valid request for euthanasia and that, in line with patient privacy, it was not obligated to inform relatives or include them in treatment discussions. So that's crazy. I mean, I understand like the privacy concerns and stuff, but what if someone isn't quite in their right mind to make that decision, because it said at the beginning that his brother um had suicidal thoughts, so maybe they just needed to be like convinced to hold on or whatever, and there's no telling kind of if it was brought up or the hospital kind of pushed for it. Kind of sounds like there's a nurse practitioner who's seemed concerned about what went down, so who knows if the hospital just, I don't know, doing things, pushing things for whatever reason. It's just really, really gross to me. Wow. Provincial Regulatory Agency, British Columbia's College of Doctors and Surgeons, told the family it could not proceed without police investigation. In March, Royal Canadian Mounted Police Patrick Balzavev emailed the relatives to say that he had reviewed the documentation and concluded Alan Nichols met the criteria for euthanasia. The family's preliminary representative, Laurie Thornes, asked British Columbia's health minister for public investigation, calling the death deeply disturbing. The health minister, Adrian Dix, said the province's oversight unit reviewed the case and has not referred it for any further inquiry. He pointed out that the euthanasia law does not allow for families to review euthanasia requests or be privy to the hospital's decisions. Trodo Libins, chair of the health law and policy at the University of Toronto, said it was astonishing that authorities concluded Nichols' death was justified. This case demonstrates that the rules are too loose, that even when people die who shouldn't have died, there is almost no way to hold the doctors and hospitals responsible. And remember, in two provinces, they don't even need to put it on the forms for whatever reason. Some disabled Canadians have decided to be killed in the face of mounting bills. So I wanted to point this out because we are told in America many times by Canadians and other people that our healthcare system sucks. And I won't say that it's perfect. Though if you do have some kind of long-term thing that you want to beat out, something like cancer, it is better. I think the data shows that it is better if you were to come over to the US and get treatment here. Than in some place like Canada. As a matter of fact, Lauren Chen, who's with the Blaze, her father had cancer, and I'll never forget her. Like, she had a thread and was crying on Twitter, talking about her father being diagnosed, and they had paid into the healthcare system all their lives, but he wasn't going to be able to be seen soon enough, and he wasn't going to receive adequate care. And so she was like, I'll do anything. I just want my dad to live. And so they ended up getting money together, coming to the US, had, I guess, paid out of pocket. got, him looked at, got surgery and all that good stuff. And by the time they did everything to like preserve his life in the US, then Canada was like, okay, we can like see you now. And it's just like, dude, everything's done. You wasted your time. Like, we solved everything in the US. Thanks a lot, Canada, but no thanks. So there's people here, this article is noting that they're considering my bills are too high, it's too expensive. So let me go ahead and just maybe euthanize myself because I can't afford to live. So we're kind of peeking behind the veil here with the Canadian system because, when you have so many people going off this system, it creates a strain. Now, people talk about universal health care, but there's not many people who are like, oh, the care is going to be so much better if we could get everyone to pay for each other's health care in this sort of way. It's like, yeah, but is the care going to be better? And even when I argue, like, well, I know some people who have like the gold standard care. They use that care to take care of the family members who are disabled and stuff. Why should they lose their like the best stuff that you can get so you could have like basic sort of universal health care? And like, because that's for the good for everyone, and that's you should be selfish. And I'm like, what? I'm like, nothing is stopping you from pulling your money with other people and just pay for each other's medical bills. As a matter of fact, there's a Christian organization called MediShare, and it's just people of faith paying for each other's bills. You put money into the pool, and if someone needs, you can alert like, oh, you just paid for someone else's bill. And everybody keeps a certain amount in, and they let each other know, they pray with each other, etc. Nothing is stopping people who want universal health care, some kind of system like that, from voluntarily doing that. But they don't want people to voluntarily do stuff because they really just want someone else to pay their medical bills. So they have to force you to be a part of it. They don't care if you like your private healthcare insurance. They don't care if you like what you got through your employer, et cetera. They don't care if you have the gold standard stuff. They want everybody to be part of the system. And it's just really crazy. Argue with all the folks, because even if they're like have these talking points and they believe it's going to be better, blah blah. If I just say no, I don't consent, I don't want that, they're like, that's too bad. I'm like, whoa, there, no means no, bro. But they don't care. But there are obviously consequences to having such limited sort of resources covering everyone and putting a strain to they're now at the point where they're like, well, maybe you should be euthanized. I think it was Allie Stuckley who I first saw share this story, and she noted like you have these limited resources, you have people who kind of start devaluing life. It's not very surprising once you see people opting for death rather than having to pay for their survival. Some disabled Canadians have decided to be killed in the face of mounting bills before being euthanized in August 2019 at the age of 41. Sean it's not Target. Tangert struggled to get the 24-hour-a-day care he needed. The government provided Tangert, who had low Griggs disease, with 16 hours daily care with his home in Powell River, British Columbia. He spent about 264 Canadian dollars, 206 a day, to 206 American dollars a day to pay the coverage during another 8 hours. Health authorities proposed that Taggart move to an institution, but he refused, saying he would be too far from his young son. He called the suggestion a death sentence in an interview with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Before his death, Taggart had raised more than 16,000 Canadian dollars, which is 12,400 US dollars, to buy specialized medical equipment he needed to live at home with his caretakers, but it still wasn't enough. I know I'm asking for a change, Taggart wrote in a Facebook post before his death. I just didn't realize that it was an unacceptable thing to do. Staten at the University of British Columbia professor pointed out that no province or territory provides a disability benefit income above the poverty line. In some regions, he said, it is as low as 850 Canadian dollars, which is 662 US dollars a month, less than a half amount of government provided to people unable to work during COVID-19 pandemic. Heidi Jans, an assistant adjunct professor in disability ethics of University of Alberta, said a person with disabilities in Canada has to jump through so many hoops to get the support that it can often be enough to tip the scales and lead them to euthanasia. Duclos, the National Health Minister, told the Associated Press that he could not comment on specific cases, but said all jurisdictions have a broad range of policies to support disabled people. He acknowledged disparities in access to services and supports across the country. Other disabled people say that an easy availability to euthanasia has led to an unsettling and sometimes frightening discussions. Now, this one's crazy. Roger Foley, who has a degenerative brain disorder and is hospitalized in London, Ontario, was so alarmed by staffers mentioning euthanasia that he began to secretly record some of their conversations. In one recording obtained by the AP, the hospital's director of ethics told Foley that for him to remain in the hospital, it would cost north of $1,500 a day. Foley replied that mentioning fees felt like coercion and asked what plan there was for his long term care. Roger, this is not my show, the ethicist responded. My piece of this was to talk to you to see if you had an interest in assisted dying. Foley said he had never previously mentioned euthanasia. The hospital says there is no prohibition on staff raising the issue. So there's a bit more in the article, but I'm gonna end it right there. But it's pretty devastating. Again, I did share that on my Facebook page that we're living in a world where people are like, do I die? And not just people making that decision on their own, that the government feels like it's someone's right, so they have to help them achieve that. that's that's so bizarre to me. That's so bizarre to me. And it's bizarre to me on the abortion front too. It's like, just because people feel like they have this right, which they don't, people have a right to not die. I understand like the bodily autonomy argument, but there's still, why do you still think the government has an obligation to legalize murder? And I understand murder is a legal term, but it's only legal because the government authorizes it, and then provide access to it, and in some cases pay for it. So, and it was odd seeing and scary seeing so many people in the Twitter thread when I first saw this saying, like, justifying this. But there were some people who are like, I don't think you actually read this article to see how it's really harming people, how they're coercing people, how it's alarming people. And man, sometimes when you're so when you're drowning in bills, it can feel like there's no way out. So can you imagine you are medically, like, something is very wrong with you, you're trying to survive, and it's costing so much money to survive. Like, it can feel that way when you're like looking at your payment for your house, payment for your car, payment for your kids' tuition, for their braces, for like all that stuff. It can start to feel so overwhelming. But you're talking about like medical bills, and you're trying to survive, and a doctor's like, this is getting really expensive, bro. Are you gonna be able to pay for this? Like, and you say, well, what's long-term care? It's like, I wasn't sent to discuss long-term care. I just wanted to see if you wanted an out. It's it's so as my sister would say, it's sick. So Canada, oh loving Canada, oh kind Canada, oh free healthcare Canada. You have all these people who are considering dying because they can't pay their bills and keeping secrecy and not needing to even write it down, and families being shut out of the conversation, and not enough safeguards. And even these European countries are like that have it in place Canada not even meeting those same standards that other countries have to keep more safeguards in place. And I don't think this is something that we should be doing. I definitely would hate to see that come here in any sort of regard. And but I remember when Obama was, I don't know if he was running at the time or if he had just become president, but he was talking about, like, maybe he was president, I don't know. He was talking about Obamacare, and he was saying, said some kind of comment about if your grandmother letting her pass or something, if she's um up there in age or something and she's sick. And I think someone asked a question and they said that their grandmother, she had a really strong will to live, and Obama kind of, it made an implication like, let grandma go, um or at least, and that's the way that people were interpreting it. And so I was talking to a former classmate, and he thought I was a genius in school, but since I'm a conservative and he's a liberal, I don't think he still like shares those views, but he thought it was really good, was a really really great writer in high school. And he's a teacher. Last I heard, he was a teacher at the school that we used to go to. And but anyway, we were going back and forth debating politics and stuff, and people were talking about Obama's death panels. I don't know if this is ringing a bell to anybody, but people were discussing that. That was a talking point in the right, that, that there'd be these Obamacare death panels and stuff. And he's like, that's so ridiculous, etc. And so I mentioned, I'm like, well, if you consider his comments, and if you do consider abortion, and how we can like devalue a person and decide that they don't have any right to life, is it really so far-fetched that people can come together and decide that someone who's an upper age, if they're like a burden to the system, that they don't have a right to life? And he blocked me. I'm like, I don't know why that was something that merited being blocked at that point. I, I thought it was a pretty logical track, but maybe it just made too much sense for him and he couldn't take it, so he ended up blocking me. And yeah, no, he's a teacher at the high school we used to go to. And I don't think I've talked to him since. I definitely haven't seen him in person. But yeah, I don't if you don't have a value of life, I don't see how this kind of stuff is too far removed from one another. And I know, again, pro-life people don't talk about euthanasia a lot, but it is, being pro-life is against abortion and also euthanasia. And similar sides of the same coin. And you can say, well, what about people who are ill and they have bodily autonomy, and if they want to go out in this world, then they should be able to do that? And it's, well, why do you think that the government should be in? The government corrupts like everything. Their role should, and granted, I guess I'm not as versed in like Canadian sort of philosophy as I would be in the US and stuff, but if the government is supposed to protect our rights, and if they have some kind of interest here to limit people's lives for financial reasons, because the taxpayers pay for each other's medical bills, I think you're going to see corruption. And you're going to see people treated unfairly and targeted. And I think there's going to be times when you're not going to get good answers, like these families in Canada. So I think it's a really sad story. I'm glad that the AP reported it. And I think these are more conversations that people need to have. I know people are very passionate about in the womb, but I think we also need to have conversations about this as well. Last thing I want to mention, again, at the end of, well, a Friday, they released, well, I think it was Trump who released, or whatever, his warrant, because they give him a copy, and he also said that they can go ahead and release it. And so Human Events, I think, was probably the first one who like posted a copy of the warrant. Then other people started posting a copy of the warrant, the search warrant. So it's very broad. And the crazy thing about it is that it allowed like 2 weeks for the raid, and they still waited. Like, I think it was on the 5th it was issued, and they had to execute it by maybe the 19th, and they did the raid on the 8th, if I'm not mistaken. But if people were saying that Trump has all these classified documents, national security threats, blah blah blah, he's got the new codes, as they were, I don't know, people were like speculating, which was crazy. Even if he had them again, they change those things so often. Like, whatever information he had regarding that stuff, would how relevant would it be like almost 2 years later? So anyway, um, they said go get all the documents, from the top, basically the day that Trump came into office. So they weren't looking for something specifically; they wanted it all. They wanted it all. And if it was such a hair on fire, this is such a dire threat, why didn't they like do it immediately? And so Michael Knowles said he was like on Fox or something, and he was like on a panel, and the liberal he was talking to was like, "Well, it was the weekend," and Michael Knowles was like, "The weekend, like." Oh yeah, we got a barbecue or something. We can that raid can wait. Like, it doesn't make any sense if it was that much of an emergency. So it really does seem like a big fishing expedition. To it is really about records and not particularly things that are declassified. Which, by the way, again, the president has the ability to declassify whatever he wants. All the information, it's like falling under his branch. There is no like bureaucrat at the DOJ or somewhere there are ways that you like properly declassify stuff and let it be known that it's declassified so other people can be aware of that. However, a bureaucrat doesn't have more authority on declassification of stuff than the president of the United States. So going after Trump over the declassified documents, like, even fact checkers and stuff were like, that's not really gonna fly, especially since there's no kind of precedent. But they know that it wouldn't play out with him being arrested over him having classified documents. He's the president. Was the president. He could declassify stuff. Now, Trump is also saying that the FBI took documents that were attorney-client privilege and executive privileged material. Now that's pretty shady. That's pretty shady. So Trump is demanding the DailyMail.com is reporting Trump demands documents are returned that were taken in the raid following report. FBI agents took attorney-client executive privilege. Donald Trump said, "Oh, great! It has just been learned that the FBI, in its now famous raid of Mar-a-Lago, took boxes of privileged client attorney material and also executive privilege material, which they knowingly should not have taken." The former president lamented on Truth Social, referencing a recent Fox News report. He said that the FBI should consider his post on alternative media's social media site a formal request for the documents to be returned to his Palm Beach estate. So yeah, that's pretty messed up. And I know there's so many people who don't like Trump and so many people who just want to see him go down and just want to see him fail, and want to see him in handcuffs. There's a video of someone who was protesting at Trump Tower, and they're like, arrest him or whatever, and they asked him and interviewed him like, well, why are you here? And he's like, because Trump needs to be arrested for all of his crimes. And they're like, well, he said provable crimes. And they said, well, what crimes are you talking about? Which crimes do you think are provable? And then he's just like, I'm done with this interview. Because so many people believe it so strongly. And you can just ask people, like, what did he do? And so many people just won't have an answer. If he had done something that was worthy of him being, like, arrested, I think Trump would have already been arrested. But they're still fishing for stuff. And I think they still just fish for stuff so they can stop him from running. And I said earlier, it doesn't make sense. They could just leave the man alone. Leave the man alone. Leave the man alone, and they could give a bunch of free media to some other Republican candidate so they can win a primary, and then you don't have to hear from Trump. And that's if he was actually going to run. I kept saying I was pretty serious he's going to run, but I know I don't know, but he might not have. But I told my sister, I'm like, Trump has one. If he has any political philosophy, this is what his philosophy is. Petty, Pettiness, pettiness, pettiness. And so my brother is convinced that Trump decided that he was going to run for president, like at the White House Correspondents' Center was when Obama was like trashing him. I still hold that Trump would not be the president if they had not fired him from Apprentice. And Trump was probably like, well, I'll go get myself another job then. And so that's when I think the moment of, because he could have always just kind of backed out of the campaign. He was campaigning at that point, but he decided to pull out and was, he could have decided to pull out and been like, you know, it's someone else's time to do that, or blah, 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 and supported somebody else. But that's not what he decided to do. He decided to go the distance and he ended up winning. So, something like this probably has his blood boiling. And, if he wasn't going to do it, ball game might have been totally changed. So if they really, it just seems like they really, 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 really don't want this man to be president again. All they have to really do is just leave him alone. All they have to do is leave him alone, not keep invoking his name as a kind of summoning thing. You know, just let him go. But they can't let him go. And I don't think it's just about him, but they also want to punish him. They want to punish anyone connected to him. They don't want someone to be the next Trump. It's supposed to be a warning that they have to utterly destroy this man and make an example out of, have his head on a pike. So people know not to cross the lines that he did when he ran. And I'm not talking about January 6th. I'm talking about the open defiance of the elitist system. That's what they really hate. That's what they really hate. I didn't like January 6th. I didn't like the riot and all that stuff that broke out, you know, but that's what they're using because they hated him before that. That's what they're using. It's way deeper, way more personal than that. Way deeper, way more personal than that. So I don't know what's ultimately going to happen with the Justice Department, if Trump's going to get his documents back that they should not have taken. If they have some stuff that was some client attorney privilege stuff, then maybe they're hoping they can fish something and find something that will help them to January 6th or his tax return. I don't know. I don't know what all is in there, but it is a fishing expedition, and it is really unfortunate that our government has been so absolutely politicized. But we will continue to look at the facts, follow the facts, and cover this story. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please visit blacktnews.com. Check out different articles that we have on the website, different merchandise that we have up for sale that you guys can check out at the store. If you like what I do here, please consider leaving a donation at blacktnews.com/donate. Everything that I do here, there are costs associated with the streaming, with the website, you know, travel, the equipment that I use, the different programs, etc. All that stuff has a cost associated with it. I know we are in inflation and times are tough, but if you can help out, I'd really much appreciate that. Otherwise, I thank you guys for sharing, for liking, for subscribing, for commenting. All that stuff does really help. Thank you guys for who watched it live. Thank you to everyone who's watching it playback. And I will see you all tomorrow.